Hello everyone. Good to see you for this post-election 2024 special webinar, where we'll be spending the next hour or so drilling down into smart data and the roadmap. Now we have a new Labour government. We'll be looking at the direction of travel, what will change and what things we're likely to see over the next couple of years. And we'll also be shedding some light on the commercials behind data sharing schemes and what we're starting to see in terms of cross-government collaboration. Just briefly to introduce our speakers today. So first we have Liz Brandt, who is CEO of CtrlShift, which is a tech consultancy. And Liz will speak for about 10 to 12 minutes on what she thinks the new government will do and the Smart Data Bill. She'll then be followed by Faith Reynolds, who is the industry and government advisor, I think, on open banking, open finance, smart data. And she's also an OBIE former consumer representative and financial inclusion specialist. And she'll then be followed by Jacob Morgan, who will give an industry perspective, actually, who is an open data strategist from our friends Raidiam. But before we get to the speakers, let's just set out some of the political context, because of course where we were before the election was that the Data Protection and Digital Information Bill didn't quite make it through wash-up before Parliament was dissolved, which meant that the next government would necessarily need to reintroduce another piece of legislation. It was a bit touch and go, but we're very pleased to see that the Digital Information and Smart Data Bill, the new Digital Information and Smart Data Bill, did make it into the Labour's first King's Speech, which is no mean feat in itself, and very much means that smart data is top of the list of priorities for this new government. And I would argue that there's very much going to be a shift in focus, picking up on some of the things out of Labour's manifesto and also the financial services growth plan. Now, the bill itself sets out three key things. So first of which is the establishment of digital verification services, along with a national asset register to map things like pipes and cables, including those that sit underground. And finally, there will be the data sharing schemes themselves, which is to do with the safe and secure sharing of data and the standards needed to make that happen. But of course, the key question will be whether it will follow the lines of the roadmap or whether there'll be something else. And we'll speak more to this as we go on Labour's approach. So first, I'm going to ask Liz to start us off and give us her take on where she thinks the direction of travel is going. So Liz, over to you.
Thanks so much, Sam, and thank you very much for inviting me today. Yes, I think after a quiet scream on the falling of the DPDI bill, I'm absolutely delighted that the bill has gone through. Just a bit of background on me and CtrlShift. We've been in play for 14 years. I'm going to have to update that to 15 shortly, I think. But we've been working on how to make the safe and easy sharing of data, what's commonly known as data portability, a reality, and how that can create value for individuals, society, and our economy. And we've been working with governments and blue chip companies for the last 14 years on what that means for strategic options, and value that can be created. So this is a very big moment in time for CtrlShift, but I would argue a very big moment in time for our economy and for society. And as I say, absolutely delighted that it made it into the King's Speech and is a priority for the Labour Party. And I think that also speaks a lot to the fact that it's got support across government. And now we're facing into what the next phase is, of course. And the bill is likely to take another 18 months to get through with some amends from what was there before. And in doing that, we then have an opportunity to slightly recut what was there before and maybe update it. So, for instance, at the moment it says consumers, and I would argue you'd be better off to talk to individuals, because otherwise citizens start to fall outside of it. patience start to fall outside of it. So if we want to use this new powers to improve government services, for instance, we might want to think about some of the nomenclature. Consumer often rates and actually excludes some types of individuals. So, what we've worked on in the past as CtrlShift with government on how data portability can add value to our economy. And our original estimates back in 2018 suggested a 27.8 billion increase in GDPR. And that does include opportunities in the public sector. I think data portability, as that was assessing, is that ability for data to be moved from the existing stovepipes and environment out into the market, and that enables a huge amount of benefit. Smart data is a form of data portability, and what smart data does is it looks to make that data available, which is a right in GDPR, but it makes it safe and easy and valuable. And that's what we've got to design over the next, let's say, 18 months. Obviously, there's a lot of work that's already been done. And I think that's also critical. There's a bit of a tendency for people to go, oh, let's start from scratch. And that would be a disaster, because there's been more than 14 years worth of work done on this. And we are not alone. We are not the only country working on this. Everybody spotted there is an equivalent 27.8 billion to add to GDP, and in this day and age, we need growth and we need the economic opportunities to be released. So we've already got Europe working on a lot of the standards and a lot of the technology. A lot of the technology has already been developed, not just in Europe, but around the world. Singapore has got some incredible examples and live examples of how this actually works today and the benefits it derives. And we've got work going on in Australia and Brazil and more broadly Japan, etc. So there's a lot already in play, and a lot of people running at this. More recently, by the way, in the Middle East, UAE and Williams running at portability and smart data line schemes. So now we've got 18 months. What are we going to do? And your question, I think, Sam, was how relevant is the roadmap as it currently stands? We need to recut the roadmap. We've got a great opportunity to do that. We've got a great opportunity to build a strategy and a roadmap that enables us to design the most beneficial opportunities into our economy and into our society. We're holding actually a Smart Data Forum on the 20th of September for around about 100 people to come and join together to work out what's already there, what works, what value can we get to, and how can we address some of the challenges ahead of us. And that will feed directly into the roadmap and the strategy for smart data. I think that for us, one of the key areas that we've got to focus on initially is where is the value. So that will give us the opportunity to focus on the priorities. And I talk about that as an economic analysis, and that makes it sound like it's just about business. But that's also about a lot of the benefits you can get for individuals in making life easier, helping them make better decisions, and managing their lives more effectively using this data. Just like businesses do. Businesses use this data to manage their businesses better. That's what we can do as individuals. So the opportunity is not just for productivity and efficiency, which is going to be a big focus out of this, for businesses and government. And I think that's a big switch that we're going to see now with this new government, is focusing on how to make government services more efficient with this data. But it's also going to be a tool for us as individuals to help us make better decisions, which will open up huge opportunities and at the same time risks. But we've got so many opportunities ahead of us. The key thing is going to be prioritizing that and helping businesses to really grasp some of the opportunities. So what are we going to need to do? I can't speak on behalf of the Smart Data Council. We haven't met since the election.
Oh.
We've still got to meet. But I can speak on behalf of CtrlShift and what we think is going to be needed. And like I say, we need to recut the strategy and the roadmap. And in that, understand what the key capabilities and common parts are. Now, in the DPDI bill, smart data looked at different markets. So it gave powers to different departments and regulators to put smart data schemes in place. And if you do that and you build out infrastructure that's not going to enable it to flow across the economy, then we won't succeed. That's a bit like building train lines that don't link up. We won't be able to get anywhere very fast. So we have to build out common parts that enable us to make that flow happen of data across our economy. And those common parts are, a lot of people go, oh yeah, in which case a bit of technology, but it's not really. Technology is part of it. Governance is a key component part, and in that, a lot of the legal aspects that need to be addressed, and standards. And by the way, a lot of this has already been designed, so we really do not need to go and reinvent it from the ground up. We need to make sure it's fine-tuned and really confidently usable within our economy. We also need to think, and I know Faith is going to talk to this, about user confidence and behavior change and how they will use this and how they will stay safe. And that's so often missed. And people like Singapore have done a great job of looking at that. And then you've got technology, and then you've got a commercial, sustainable model for the market, which I think is another barrier if we're not careful. How do we create a data sharing marketplace that is sustainable commercially? And I think open banking has seriously suffered from that. And then we can look at the roadmap and how we actually develop that and how we target value. And I've always been an advocate for identifying where you want to get the value and then targeting the value, rather than let's make it work for everybody and then work out how we create value. And I think that would be a big mistake for our market. That said, lots of people have done that, so we can build on what they've already done. We don't have to do that. Europe has done with GaiaX. They've set loads of standards for the data and the governance and so on and so forth. So we can build on that. We don't have to start from scratch. And I think the other key part is going to be understanding risk, and in that roadmap and in that strategy, understanding what the potential risks are, and that's always a good part for strategy. And one that's going to become very rapidly apparent, I think, is how bad business practices can have a massive impact, and that could be very much accelerated or accentuated by the availability of data. And thankfully, the DMCC bill did get through, so we do have the Digital Markets Unit forming in the CMA, the Competitions Market Authority, that can call out bad practices, and they will have real power to make businesses change behaviours and change those practices. And I think one that's going to be, I suspect, will become really, really important is if you know of the Behavioural Insights team. If you don't, go look them up. They're brilliant. They did a really, really interesting report recently called The Shrouded Economy, and that points to a really big failure point. If as soon as we start making this data become available, what is the shrouded economy? Shrouded economy is when you and I can't really see where the value is in services or products, and therefore our choices are really hard. And so if you take something like food, you can start to see how you can make better choices about food. So you can see with data, you can look very quickly at, is this product cheaper than this product? But with food, you can't actually make any decent decisions about whether or not this has got this is hyper processed or not. So we can't get to that data at the moment. But those sort of product choices can be reasonably quickly de-shrouded. If, however, you're trying to buy a car, then that information is harder to get to, and understanding the value of what you're buying is harder. If you're trying to buy a heat pump, and a provider and an installer of a heat pump, even harder to understand what's good value and what's not good value. Why is that important? Well, we all want to spend our money effectively, but also we want businesses to strive to offer good value products and services. And when they do that, we get good value for our money. And when they do that, they become more productive and our economy grows. So those efficient markets is what this starts to drive. But whilst people can't make a choice effectively of what's valuable and what's not valuable, the release of this data is going to be less effective. So we need to think about that as well. And understanding that as a risk is really key for us to understand how to unravel some of that. So, we've got lots to think about, not just how do you make the infrastructure work, but how do you actually make it work and create value for us as individuals and as an economy.
Sorry, Liz, I'm going to interject there because we're running up to time, and I just wanted to make an observation as well, because I think the way you're setting out the landscape here, it strikes me that this new direction that we're moving into, because it's kind of less, it is about markets, but it's also about public service. And so, of course, what you're going to see is an increasing need for the private sector to work with the public sector, and in terms of the collaborative effort that will be needed to drive that forward. But at the same time, it's almost as if there's been a shift in the kind of economic lens, that this is whole economy, I think, in terms of where the whole kind of smart data initiative is going, rather than on the kind of focus on sector by sector. At least that seems to be the feel or the sense that I get from it. But let's hang on to that thought, and I'm going to pass over to Faith, and Faith is going to speak to what she sees from her own experience of having worked in open banking, but at the same time, I think touching on the Labour manifesto and the financial services growth plan, because of course there's a key point of focus there in terms of resilience and looking at vulnerable groups as well. So Faith, over to you.
Thanks, Sam. So yeah, I mean, you've teed me up really well, actually, and just by a bit of way of background, I guess. So I have a portfolio of things. So I've kind of brought together a few different interests across some work I do as a non-executive at Fair for All Finance, which distributes dormant assets for financial inclusion, but also looking at work that I've done with the Investing and Savings Alliance around investing as well. So I mean, a bit like Liz. When the election came and the bill wasn't pushed through, it was a bit like a moment in time where you just sort of take a deep breath. So I'm really pleased to see that the bill's come through. Obviously, it's put us back again by another 18 months to 2 years. So that's hard, but it does give us an opportunity to kind of look at how we can really sort of think about and get things in place and get the planning done. So I think it's really important we move towards smart data, and I'm really sort of pleased to see it's kind of been made a priority by this government. One of the things from the smart data roadmap that I'm hoping will remain is this key pillar of inclusion. And a lot of the premise of smart data is that will reduce costs for consumers and give them more power in markets and help them get better deals. And from a consumer perspective, that's really super important. So if we just take a look at some of the statistics, large groups of people in the UK economy are struggling. So Fair for All Finance has recently published its a new segmentation. And it shows that the number of people living in vulnerable circumstances is up, so up from around 17 to now 20.2 million. And those segments, they look at people in different circumstances, but we've got a group who are on higher incomes, but also have higher debts that are struggling to pay off. So in precarious circumstances, particularly affected by mortgage interest rates, but also others who have really very little access to credit or savings. And we call them our forgotten families. And they tend to be people who live in higher levels of poverty, carers, or living with long-term disabilities or long-term health problems, and who are quite reliant on benefits. And we know that around between 16 and 23 billion pounds a year goes unclaimed in benefits. We know there's around 9 million people in debt, only a third of whom will go and get help, many who wait over a year before they actually look to get help, by which time their debts are more complex. There's maybe 24% of the population affected by the poverty premium, where they're paying more for essentials like energy and insurance and credit. And that's costing them, the economy, around £2.8 billion. And so you can see the sort of build-up of sort of challenges that people have had, which have really sort of been exacerbated then by the pandemic and this cost of living crisis. At the other end, we've got sort of data, if you like, from Hargreaves Lansdown Resilience Barometer that shows 12 million households are actually in a more positive position where they have got surplus cash and they could be investing for their financial futures. But across all of the income quintiles that they have got in that sort of range where they've got a bit of extra surplus cash, they could be investing, only sort of around half, so only 47% across the 12 million are actually investing. And so we've seen this through work at Tizer, where there's a real kind of lack of sort of equality in how people invest across the UK. It's very regional. People in London and South East much more likely to invest in, say, stocks and shares ISAs than other people across the country. Particularly people in Wales are a lot less likely to invest. And that goes to regional inequalities. But do you know what? One of the things that it said is that you are 40% more likely to invest if you think that people like you do, which says something about kind of how people perceive services and whether they're being tailored to their needs and circumstances. And particularly we see women invest less than men, so less likely to invest, also less likely to think that investing is for people like them. So we have this sort of challenge, if you like, of actually people really at all levels maybe struggling to access basic services, but also struggling to make the use of the ones that are there. So smart data provides us really great opportunity to look at how we combine data sets for consumers to increase their income, especially take up a benefit, get a better deal, and reduce costs, particularly for utilities, but also for credit, insurance, and purchases, the retail purchases, which we haven't really got to with smart data yet. Better returns on saving investments, and look at just how do we help people make improved decision making. One of the things that people really struggle with is trade-offs. How do I take this big group of variables and make the right decision for me? So how could smart data help with that and help reduce stress and increase achievement of goals? And interestingly, research by Nest shows that even saving small amounts can help people improve their emotional well-being. And we see that through one of the early use cases of open banking is just small amounts being swept into a savings account, helping people create that new savings buffer, and that being quite successful. So we're doing reasonably well with open banking, but I think one of the things that I think is that people are quite sophisticated, and to get excited and to engage, they want more sophistication than perhaps is being made available at the moment. And that's again where we need more data to flow in. At the moment, we're struggling to do some of the basics, such as let people share connected savings accounts. So if you have a current account and you have a connected savings account to that, open banking allows you to share your current account data via the API, but it stops short of the savings account data because that's not being caught in the regulation. And now there's no alternative way to access that data either, because it's firmly in the app and linked through the current account. So it's very sort of frustrating from a consumer point of view. We can't do some of the basics. Looking downstream, if we were to look ahead, there are also some really big challenges that we have, which kind of put a bit more pressure on us moving a bit quicker. So if we're looking at the aging population we have, that brings kind of new challenges around sort of the health system. And we're looking, some predictions from UKRI saying we want to start preventing health problems more to reduce pressure on the NHS. And the Centre for Ageing predicts that by 2043, 4.5 million older people will live alone, which can obviously put some more pressure on housing. There's going to be, people are having less children, so those social networks are different. And so we think about what the communities we want to build. You might begin to start thinking, okay, what data do we need to help build those communities so they work better for groups of people who perhaps don't have children, and we don't have those social networks we used to have. The Lifetime Savings Initiative at Schroders shows a massive difference in retirement outcomes for people who rent versus people who own a home. So housing, energy costs, health, wealth, they're all interconnected. And we need to be thinking about how we use data, not just sort of for consumers and individual use cases, but for planning and system development too. So I guess the bill's confirmed that smart data is coming into effect. That's really important. But if we're looking at where smart data might focus, I'm sort of interested in seeing it focus much more being aligned to sort of national goals for increasing digital and financial and social inclusion and resilience in the UK. So it's a slightly different kind of take from Liz. I think it's really important to look for value. It's really important to look for commercial use cases. But actually, we've got some massive issues on our horizon. How do we deploy smart data to, halve the number of people waiting over a year to get debt advice, or decrease the unclaimed benefits by 2/3 within a year or two? How can we auto-enroll people onto a matched savings scheme called Help to Save, which would help them save into their bank account? How do we get that moving forward? We desperately need open savings, investments and pensions to help people access targeted support and advice more quickly at lower cost. So we're kind of thinking about sort of like later life. How do we start connecting health data to people's later life care needs so they can make adjustments to how they live now or how they save so they're ready for later life? So I think the moment, and you said it, Sam, smart data is often seen as like a solution to solve for market-based problems. And I think that's important, but we need a big vision for digital UK that actually look at how to solve big mission areas that Leah has set out. How are we going to be using data to really address productivity and growth, but also address problems we have with kind of climate change and with health and the burden on the NHS, etc. And so I was quite pleased that Peter Kyle was on LinkedIn. He's the Secretary of State for Science, Technology and Innovation. And he was talking about digital transformation of public services. We need that stronger public digital infrastructure if we're really going to get the benefits from smart data. I was really struck when looking abroad at other use cases. So the one that Estonia has is the personal digital state, which automatically contacts people when they need to act. And in one quote, a government official says, people shouldn't worry about how to get information themselves. The information will come to them in a timely manner by itself. And I just was like, that's it's so far away from where we are in the UK. But it would be really great to see use cases like the one that's home buying, that smart data roadmap, having that kind of underlying principle. I don't have to work really hard to make this work. Actually, the information is going to come to me, and it's going to be much simpler. And to just give an example that is apparently live in Estonia now, there's a baby's born. The hospital generates an ID code, a birth certificate's generated, the parent ID codes are linked, and they get notifications. They're offered child benefits, their local regional office is notified, the baby's registered for needing a kindergarten place, and the payments for those child benefits go straight into their preferred bank account before they've left the hospital. Yeah. And that's just such a vastly different experience where we still have to register in paper and take our child down to an office to register their birth. So we've got kind of like these kind of key use cases where we could see sort of real change happen. We've got billions of benefits outstanding because our application processes are so slow and complex. Can we imagine a UK where people apply for credit? They're turned down because they don't have, and they can't meet the affordability requirements. Their open banking data identifies there could be receipt of benefit. They're automatically assessed and then asked which account like their benefits be paid into. That is a completely different experience to the one we have right now. So I think we need a bit more ambition and more vision and more public infrastructure. I think we can take some kind of like as inspiration from our international neighbours, whether that's in India with the India Stack, in Brazil with open finance, in the Nordics with digital identity and high levels of digital inclusion, or in Estonia with their personal digital state.
Thank you.
And I think we kind of need to.
Can I just? Yeah, so I'm going to
ask
you as well, if that's all right. But have you got a little bit more to say, or are we?
I'm just kind of like I can just finish up. I think what I was kind of like, I'll just finish with this use case, because this is actually kind of like what people struggle with. So I think I have this vision where authorised third-party providers are accessing data from different regulated markets and helping someone pull their life together meaningfully so they can navigate those trade-offs. We think about education data, housing data, energy, health and finance. So for instance, these are the kinds of conversations that I have in Exmouth, which is sort of down in the southwest, where we have kind of a lot of people working in gig economy. And they're kind of saying, you know, what's the house that I can afford to rent? How much is the energy going to cost? And can I afford that? And if I can't afford that, where do I move to? Will Exeter be cheaper? And are there school places for my kids? And is there work there? Will I be able to get a job? Or should I move north? Will housing be cheaper there? Will there be jobs available in my sector? And how far away will I be from family and support networks? And will I manage? Those are the kinds of conversations I have often with people in Exmouth. And that's where you kind of say, how does that data come together to help somebody find the right home for them in the right location, with places for their kids at school, and a job or job opportunities that meet their skills. So that's the kind of thing I'm interested in looking at. How do we move to that kind of reality, and how do we raise the bar for our ambition? You know, we're kind of looking at, and it's important, you know, that we're able to compare petrol prices, but that's different from being able to get my life sorted and get help with those really difficult trade-offs.
Yes, no, very much so. And actually, while you were speaking there, Faith, because of your background in open banking, I can see very much that we're kind of we're moving away from financial services and data, not even though financial services underpins a lot of what we do and is connected to a lot of what we do, to kind of data services. And then picking up on Liz's point earlier on around citizens, putting consumers/citizens at the centre of all of that. And then the services wrap around that individual, I think, as opposed to what Liz alluded to in terms of, you know, making markets work and making them more efficient, and looking at the product/service in different sectors. I mean, that strikes me as being the kind of direction of travel that we're going to, which is a great a sort of segue into where Jacob may sit, and sort of how he sees the world from an industry perspective, and particularly given your Forrester research background, and of course now you're at Raidiam as well as Open Data Strategist. So I'm going to pass over to Jacob.
Thanks, Sam. So yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of insight already, and it's sort of music to my ears, a lot of this, because as you say, I've been writing about a lot open finance, open banking, the future of financial services and collaborative business models at Forrester for, you know, the last 8 or 9 years, and have only recently joined Raidiam, so that in essence I'm a poacher turned gamekeeper, and I can actually now start building the future. Rather than just writing about it, which is a great position to be in. But to the comments there, both from Faith and Liz, I mean, data really is the lifeblood. It's not the oil, it's the lifeblood. It's more important than oil. You don't have to mine it as such. It actually flows through everything. And that sort of vision of the future where, you know, essentially data is providing the input to your digital concierge, and it's open capabilities and smart data are lowering the cost of entry for innovators to build services with the customer at the heart of that proposition, is very much the idea of the future. I think that certainly that I share. You know, we take it for granted that you can put into Google Maps that, you know, where you want to go, and it can give you a nudge that you need to leave at the right time. Well, to do that, I have to buy into a platform that supports Google Maps. Wouldn't it be great if people could just build that into their capabilities and their products and their services in the future? And you kind of already can, but it's in a more restricted sort of a way. So yeah, I mean, a little bit about me. I mean, I am from Forrester Research in my past life, so I spent 10 years there writing about open APIs and the shift towards open banking and open finance. But with Raidiam, we now actually put that into action. Raidiam built the security and the trust infrastructure that sits behind open banking here in the UK, and open banking and open finance and open insurance in Brazil, and digital identity capabilities like Connect ID in Australia. So it's actually literally enabling some of this future to be built. But when it comes to the proposals, it's fantastic to see this in play again and see it formalized and see the intent formalized, but the devil will start to come out in the detail. And it will take a lot of coordination and gentle nudging to make that happen. But to some of the points that Liz was making, we do have some great starting points. We have other countries that have implemented open capability since the UK implemented open finance, or open banking rather. So we've got their learnings, their perspectives, their insights to bring to bear. But the idea of getting sort of cross-sectoral, interoperable, smart data that allows data to flow around the customer and essentially bring services to them and allow businesses to take their products and services to customers rather than force them to go to the business, that's a really interesting proposition. The idea that you could almost be in that reverse auction situation. You advertise the fact that you are moving house and looking to understand an area, and people can then or businesses can then approach you with suitable products and services, and some of those may be insight services to help you understand which schools are most suitable for your children. That data might be available with your consent through the trusted sharing from government sources that you then share as part of that proposition when you're providing insights to people about what it is you're looking for example. So it's this ability to join things up, to create sort of common value around some of this, and it's absolutely about the value for the customer, whether that's a business customer or a sort of high street customer. And I'm really pleased that things like digital identity are one of the sort of really important factors of this, because there are certain accelerants that you really do need to have in place, like the standards, like the trust frameworks, like the the API capabilities, which is the most likely sort of delivery vehicle for a lot of this. And digital identity is one absolute aspect of that. And that's a sort of touchy subject for some people. Some people think that's an encroachment on civil rights, essentially. But those are probably the same people that are tweeting about it on X that are accessing that through their Apple phone, for which they had to pony up information for their Apple ID. So they already have some of this, but delivered via the private sector. So being able to have a digital identity that is something that you can build services around as a third party and innovate on top of, I think is a really, really important thing. But you absolutely need to be mindful of those perceptions. You need to demonstrate security. You need to demonstrate value. You need to demonstrate trust and how you're managing that risk. And I think it's, the idea of open banking, if we just briefly look at that, PFM, personal financial management, was one of the initial use cases, the idea of creating that financial dashboard. But, to Faith's point, a lot of that data was missing. You couldn't get your savings data in there. And in fact, most customers had a relatively, like me, they have one bank account. You don't need to integrate multiple bank accounts, but you do need to see your savings information. One of the areas where you perhaps do have more complexity is things like pensions, but that was out of scope. So these things will start to come into scope now. So you'll be able to get a fully rounded picture of an individual, really understand their financial exposure, but also what they're paying for utilities. So when it comes to things like debt consolidation services, you'll be able to have a much better picture of the individual's sort of actual life rather than just a snapshot of financial well-being or lack of. And we've already seen open banking help with the consolidation of data around the banking side, but now you'll be able to expand that out to create much more sort of valuable insights. But going beyond that, I think it's really important to be able to convert those insights into action. This is something that when we look at what Australia did with the consumer data right, which, arguably is one of the broadest scopes of open data capability. It covers telcos, it covers utilities. They started with open finance. They had within that the idea that you could get insight from the data, but then you couldn't actually convert that into action. So they didn't have payments, for example. So if you could see that your money was tied up, but could be better utilized elsewhere, paying down your mortgage or in a different savings account, you couldn't move it. So actually, that's one of the changes that they've now brought into scope to ensure that you can't just get the insight, you can then action on that insight. Some of the smart data capabilities that we've seen already in the UK, people like Oxfordshire County Council, who have got an energy saver app for residents. Now you'll potentially be able to take that to the next step to evaluate other suppliers to then perhaps migrate your account in the future. And all of this, I think, is that will rely on education, essentially, because you can't just build these services and expect people to adopt them, whether that's on the businesses or the third parties that are providing the data, or indeed the innovators that are building solutions. If consumers aren't adopting these services, or consumers don't trust these services, then you've got a big challenge, and you will sort of fall at that very first hurdle. So one of the asks that we really need to consider a way of driving forward smart data is how we communicate the value to consumers, how we ensure that they're confident with sharing that data, that they are recognizing it's about delivering value for them and enabling them to get better products and services. That's absolutely critical in this. And I think as well, some of the pilots we've seen are in quite limited areas. It's SME financing, for example, which there is value to drive in using open finance and having the task force around that. But more individuals can benefit from open or smart data around schools and education, or around health. So again, maybe to the point that Faith was making, we need to be a bit more ambitious in the scope. You have to be able to walk before you can run. But again, we've got some of those accelerants from other countries that we can look at. And I do think in some places we are. We led the world with open banking, but we're starting to fall behind. Places like India, with the India stack that was mentioned earlier, they have a digital identity layer that 1.2 billion people have in the form of Aadhaar. They have a consent layer within the India stack that provides the means of passing consent in a reliable way, so that what data someone can access, whether information has been consented for use, and it's just something that you can understand from the get-go. They also have a data sharing layer. So again, they're thinking about not just how customers provide the ability to or provide consent, but also how the businesses then share the data. They're thinking about all of this at sort of multiple levels. Over in Singapore, which was also mentioned, you've got things like SG Findex, the financial data exchange that was built as part of their open banking capability. They've now built a further one, SG Tradex, I think it's called, or something like that, which is all about trade data for open data sharing within trade financing and supply chain. So as you start to see where government can contribute data, businesses can contribute data, manufacturers can contribute data from we've already got data sharing amongst the auto industry in Europe, for example. All of these can contribute to building much better and more suitable products and services for individuals. But you do have a number of those sort of systemic challenges around, well, who's going to pay for this? How do you build a commercial model that will help drive collaboration and not penalize collaboration, or indeed make it so that different entities within that sort of flow of data or flow of value feel that they're perhaps paying more, or the burden of building the solution is falling, you know, more heavily on them. This is something that in the States, for example, the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau, the CFPB, that's been legislating for funds in the US, they recognise in their proposals that the smaller the business, the smaller the participants, the higher that disproportionate cost will be. So they're actively looking for ways of ameliorating some of the costs across all players within the industry, and also to enable that environment where the big players aren't over represented or influencing the standards or influencing the specifications, the technology underlining it in a disproportionate way. So there's a whole host of challenges that we will need to work through, but again, doing that as part of a collaborative community of people that have a vested interest in making this work is going to be very exciting in the years to come. And you know, I was talking to my colleague Marie, and she was saying, you know, I think it was it wasn't the FCA, it was, I can't recall who, but there's already a coalition of the willing where you know, the members were approached to finance some of the experimentation behind this, and over half of the larger members actually came forward because they could see the wider benefit and the opportunity that that some of this will unlock for them.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Jacob. So much there to kind of pick apart and delve a little bit deeper into. And I've made a note of, and I think you've all touched on various aspects of this, but certainly one is about joined up, being more joined up in terms of all the different data and capabilities that there are. I think the word that I'm hearing again and again is ambition, and that whilst the UK was perhaps a world leader when it came to open banking, we're now falling behind because we're lacking the ambition. So that would be quite useful as well for others to comment on, if you would. And then this whole notion of value for the customer, and also, I suppose, the appeal or attractiveness, what's the offer to industry, is something that we'll probably need to tackle. So I'm going to open it up now for you others to pitch in. So whilst everyone was giving their presentations or speaking points, if you like, I don't know, should we go back to Liz? Liz, did you want to perhaps pick up on some of the things that Faith and Jacob have mentioned? And actually, one of the things as well is around digital verification, because I know you've done quite a lot of work around that, haven't you?
No, it's been a great conversation so far, and I think what comes out from all of this is that we're creating a whole new market, and I like to think about it as a comparator to electricity. I know it's not the same, and we'll get into why it's not the same, but it is very similar. We can the generation of this data and the flow of this data in a way that's safe and easy enables so many things. It enables us to have a light. It enables us to have a dishwasher, thank God, and a washing machine, thank God. But it also enables us to manufacture. It enables us to clean water. It enables us to. Electricity is something that enables masses in our market. And in that market of electricity, you have the market of generating the data. You have the market of transporting the data. You have the market of making the data, the electricity in this sense, making the electricity, transporting the electricity, making that electricity safe when it arrives for use, making it safe when you are using it, understanding as a consumer how to stay safe, understanding as a manufacturer how to stay safe. As a consumer, our electricity market is quite safe. Mostly we just need to know not to take our hairdryers into the bath, okay? Because the rest of it is pretty much sorted out. We've got plugs that have fuses in them. We've got plug sockets that are standardized. We have fuse boxes in our homes that make sure that we are safe as we're using that electricity. It is regulated as it comes into our homes to make sure it doesn't explode the house. We are, and how we actually get it here is all regulated and managed and governed. But each part of that is a market in its own right. Pylons are a huge multi-billion-dollar market around the world. Each part of that electricity market is a market in its own right. So what we are doing is we are pulling that market for data out of the ground. And if it was electricity, it would be easier to deal with, or something similar to electricity. But the thing that's different about data is it's what the economists would say a non-rivalrous asset. There's other components about it that are different, but that's the one that makes it really difficult to understand how to make this work, because non-rivals means you can have it and make value out of it, and I can have it and make value out of it, and therefore we can all have it and have value out of it. But then in that we have no rules and legislation around that, because our rules and legislation are mostly around ownership. Okay, so if you own it and you use it, there's liability around that, etc. So that needs to be still understood. So, but all the same, that's part of how we design this market. But we have to understand we are making a wholly new market, and in that there's massive opportunity. And in that, exactly as Faith said, our ambition really is the limit. Okay, we have to work out. We can take it to so many different places. My well-being, my career, my skills, my house, my home, my house, how to green my life, etc. All of those things. But I think we have a bit of a danger in the UK, which is we think we've done really well with open banking in enabling us to put an infrastructure in place. And I'm sorry to say that we haven't, because what we've done is we haven't created it around the individual. As you said, Sam, the data market, when enabling all the value, needs the data to integrate around the individual. And from there, we can actually enable consent, and we can enable that trust that they can talk about, the flow of data. The open banking architecture means the data sits still with the paternalistic silos of the banks. The consent still sits with the paternalistic silos of the banks. So we have a next step on from open banking, where we need to architect this new market, which is what people like the Netherlands and in some instances India have been doing, and how we actually design that is going to be critical. So and that has to be that the revolving it around the individual has to be one of the principles, I think, of designing this new market. And I'm really pleased that you mentioned digital verification, and Jacob mentioned it, because that, in the way the UK is designing that pre-DPDI falling, and I'm assuming into the new bill, is revolving it around the individual. It's designing it so that the individual can hold their verification, and designing that around wallets and personal data services, so you can hold the verification of you. And people get really irritated about verification and digital identity, actually. Okay, and I'm very pleased the UK have called it verification services, because I am one thing when I am looking after my children, I'm another thing when I'm going to a pub, and I'm another thing when I rock up at work. So my identity is not one thing. Yeah. And so we have the way that the UK has been designing these verification services around verified attributes. And a verified attribute is a set of data or data that is verified about me. That might be my address, it might be my driving license, but it also might be my glasses prescription, so that I can then take that verified attribute as a part of me and make that available in the marketplace where it's needed. And the way that the UK has been designing that is around governance structures and certification and trust marks, which goes back to trusting this. But that can only happen if we have the data. Okay, we can't do those verification services if we haven't got the data and we've got the governance structure, etc., etc. So picking off bits of the market really doesn't work. You've got to do whole markets, but at least start somewhere. So we start where there is real value, and value can be like Singapore have done around skills. So Singapore have got this incredible service called My Future Skills. They've got a wallet, they've got a data store, they've got a verification service. You can register your skills. You can say, this is where I want my career to go. They can tell you which skills you need to gain access to. They even grant fund you to go and get the skills. You put those skills in your wallet and you apply for the job. Now, in a world where we have to transition something like 60% of our skills for the future economy, how brilliant would that service be? Revolving around verification services, digital wallets, and digital services that enable us to do that. That's where we need to go.
And I just want to sort of pick up on a couple of things there, because this idea that we, being sort of bleeding edge, as it were, has meant that the UK did, by virtue of moving first, not necessarily end up with the optimum solution. And I heard loud and clear coming back from people as I interviewed around CDR, the consumer data right in Australia, that despite the fact that it was the consumer data right across multiple sectors, telcos, utilities, starting with open finance, one of the biggest bits of feedback they had was around the consent process, because the banks started the process with open finance. They designed that process, and by the time they got to bringing into scope the utility services and the telcos, their consent process didn't work for them. And this again is a classic example of designing solutions that work for an industry. And we need that interoperability. We need that the verification services. We need to weave that golden thread, if you like, through multiple providers of multiple sectors, so that we are delivering services that work for the vast majority, if not everybody, rather than just sort of piecemeal solutions along the way. But equally on that verification services side, over in Australia, they have Connect ID, which is a very, very similar process. What it does is it uses the banks to provide verification. So, for example, is this person old enough to drink? But what it provides is the answer, a simple yes or no. It doesn't send back their birthday, it sends back the insight. And decoupling the insight from the underlying data is, it is certainly a valuable thing. And Raidiam actually built the underlying trust frameworks for the banks that service sits on. And the banks are then able to monetize that. And again, this is the idea of driving value throughout the value chain, or driving opportunity throughout the value chain. There is a micro payment to the bank for that particular verification service. So the banks are actually able to monetize some of the investment that they've otherwise made into CDR, because again, what I've seen in my looking around the implementation of various open capabilities in different countries, that's often the catalyst for investment in monetization services. But you do need to build the commercial model into this discussion, into the conversation. I don't mean this discussion, I mean the broader discussion, because without that commercial model that is working for multiple participants, you're not going to get the impetus that will help drive adoption. And also, you're not necessarily going to get that consumer-oriented focus. If you are having revenue opportunities shared unequally, then the people who get the most will be the ones that influence the conversation most. So you have to sort of think carefully about how you can distribute value across the multiple providers that are ultimately collaborating to deliver a service for the individual or the business.
Well, this is very much picking up on the point that Liz made around thinking about data and data services in a completely different way. And it's the first time actually I've heard someone speak about data in the context of a kind of utility almost, and electricity and energy. And actually that's kind of got me thinking about how I think about data and this whole debate, because sure, it's there are different kind of facets of the energy market and the electricity market, but the overlying, I kind of I suppose, structure is very much something which needs to be government backed, government driven, because it is service then that's provided to everybody. So, and when you're thinking about the flows of data, I really like that analogy that it's kind of akin or analogous to electricity. Faith, did you want to talk about some more of the international schemes? Because
we've covered quite a bit from the international schemes, but I will pick up sort of some of the sort of the consumer perspective, and also some of the challenges, I guess, that we see. Because with electricity, it is a really nice kind of example of how things should be working with data. And I can go in and I can switch my light on, and the light comes on, and it does the job I expect it to. I think one of the sort of challenges we have for consumers, and which have been picked out in research that the government has done specifically on smart data, is people's sort of concerns about what will happen to their data and how secure it is, and also it feeling kind of like the concept of sharing data feeling kind of like it seems to fly in the face of everything they're told about scams and fraud, which is a massive problem in the UK. So this whole people are kind of wary of sharing their data, and then people also are not really don't really necessarily trust the services that they share data with. And for vulnerable people, that's particularly a challenge. And so we see in word that the sort of system should deliver inclusive outcomes, but we see in practice the most vulnerable consumers saying, well, actually, if I share my data, I could get priced out of markets here. I'm not going to get something that's better for me. I might be seen as a high-risk customer, and I might get something that's either really expensive or something that's just not right for me. Or alternatively, my data will be exploited because I don't have the capability to shop around. I'm not really sort of savvy in that way, and so I'll be exploited because they'll know what price point I'm willing to pay, which might be much higher than somebody else because I don't know the market as well as somebody else. And so we see the sort of like the nervousness that comes through, and that's kind of reiterated by consumer organizations as well. There was a little exchange recently on LinkedIn where somebody said, smart data, more discrimination, more exclusion. Is that what it means? And at the moment, I've not seen anything that teaches me or tells me that that's actually going to be different to that. We have existing markets that don't work particularly well for people in the most low incomes. So how are we going to change that with smart data? What else needs to come in to make that happen? And that's why I kind of feel like there needs to be some alignment to kind of some clear national, social, economic and climate goals to achieve that. And I think the other thing which is really interesting is this kind of concept of consent in the middle there, because we kind of say that we are giving people control over their data. But by and large, I can't choose to send my data to the doctor. I can't choose to do that. I can't even choose for my doctor to send data to the bank to say that I have a mental health problem or a physical health problem. I can't choose to do that. That's really complicated. There's no easy automatic way. What I do is I consent to somebody pulling my data from my account. And it's almost akin to the difference between push payments, where I choose to make a payment and I push it out of my bank account, versus, say, a direct debit, where I kind of sign up for something and people keep pulling money out of my account. And that's really what we've got in the way we set it up. And that's where the challenge rests, is that we are kind of asking consumers to take the risk of consenting to share their data with not necessarily understanding the implications of doing that. And that's one of the things that comes through from the research, is that people look at consent, find it a bit complicated, and then are saying, but what am I actually consenting to? What's going to happen with my data? It's not just consenting to share the data, it's the implications of sharing the data I'm consenting to, but the implications of sharing the data haven't necessarily been clearly laid out for me. And I think that comes back a little bit to Liz's sort of, how do we design the system around somebody who's going to be looking after or promoting my needs, and who's incentivized to do that in the middle of this journey? Because at the moment, it's really about a data consumer that's interested in my data for a purpose which might help me, but also helps them. And credit is the absolute obvious one. It helps me because actually helps me get access to credit, and I'm incentivized to share because I might get a better deal, or I might just get access to credit. But on the flip side, it really helps the company because they know what the kind of risk is. That use case has worked really well because it creates value on both sides. But it also can lead to exclusion, because you can see that somebody's not, hasn't got the right profile to lend to. So I just sort of think that that's where the nervousness comes in from a consumer point of view, is around kind of, it's really quite complex. You're asking me to sign over data for something I don't necessarily understand the implications of, and then there isn't a very clear pathway to accessing redress if something goes wrong, that's also quite unclear. And so I think, you know, in terms of how do we think about designing this, some of those other elements in this next 2 years, we really need to be thinking about, what does the journey really look like from a consumer point of view? Not just how do they consent and authenticate, but what does that mean for them? And how do we redesign that so actually it works much more in their interest, and consumers can therefore trust it and engage with it because they know actually, oh, my data is actually going to do something positive for me, and I can sign up to that. And I think that comes back to when I turn on the light bulb goes on and there's light in the room. And that's what I want it to feel like when I share my data. I share my data and actually something good comes out of it. I think that's what we need to see. And we need to see it in that kind of way that electricity works. It's safe. I can use it easily. I don't need to control for the power coming into the room. It's not going to explode, and it's going to work well for me. So I think it's a great analogy, but it also kind of throws up some of these challenges around consent and trust as well.
Yes, no, absolutely. And I think in terms of the safety, what you're talking about is, you know, when you switch on the light, it's safe in effect, and what you want people to feel when they're giving their consent to all these different types of data services is that it's safe to do so, and it's not going to detriment and put them at a disadvantage or be detrimental to them in any way. So that's
I've just got
Jacob's point around perceptions, isn't it? Public perceptions.
Yeah, and I was just going to sort of comment on a couple of things that Faith was saying there, because you know, you're absolutely right that consumer transparency is really important. I think there are elements still. So on the flip side, it becomes hard for those exploitative companies to hide if the data is more accessible on the products and the services that they are offering. So there is an element of exposure, as it were, through some of the, you know, the requirements and the smart data itself on products and services that will lead to uncovering more of that inequality. But you're absolutely right. I mean, it was the same with the argument around personal financial management. Everyone thinks of the happy case where the money you have just goes up and up and up. What if every time you open it, it's just telling you that you're getting poorer and poorer and not working for you and not providing services that you need? But also on the trust side, and this is part of what Raidiam does, and part of my interest in joining Raidiam, you are also able to put some checks and balances in place with the frameworks and the infrastructure that you build around trust itself. So, for example, with open banking and open finance in Brazil, the centralized directory tells you exactly what a third party can do with that data, and it provides a technical assurance of what that data is being used for, and you know, literally assures that it's only being used for that purpose. So you're able to, whilst it's a lot for a consumer perhaps to fully understand what they are consenting for, the controller of the ecosystem, the Brazilian government or whoever is controlling the ecosystem, can then sort of technically assure what those service providers are doing. So it provides a means really of enabling you to share data with someone that you don't know, i.e. a third party that you've never met, because they've gone through this vetting, they've gone through this assurance. And also on the electricity side, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because electricity does indeed sort of turn a light on, but I need an adapter to travel. And that adapter goes into several different formats, and some of my technology doesn't work overseas because it's on 120 phase, not 240. So that's, and again, that's part of what Raidiam does. It provides it removes the need for an adapter. So for that particular ecosystem, the entry point is controlled. So when a third party is brought into that ecosystem, you know that they are then able to flow data amongst the other APIs and the other connection points or endpoints within that ecosystem securely. So it controls that sort of entry point and assures exactly what data they can use, who that can be shared with, and what purposes it's for, on top of which the customer consent is then applied for when that third party is doing something on behalf of the customer. So in that sense, it's sort of providing interoperability within the ecosystem, but there's nothing stopping similar frameworks in other countries or other industries, creating interoperability between those trust frameworks, and sort of daisy chaining, as it were, or connecting those different environments. So on the one hand, there's the consent and that sort of entry point, but then there's also the back end way through the frameworks, through the standards, through the governance processes that are put in place by essentially the government or the controller of the ecosystem.
I think
so. It's a multi-angled point. It's a multi.
It's definitely, and I think you're right in terms of sort of like there being some kind of facility within that, so to help kind of control that. One of the things that we talk that we've seen it in the Green Paper, which started the kind of discussion about smart data in 2018-19. So a good 5 years ago now, is the sort of concept of people being able to access redress, etc. But what we need really in a data journey to be able to kind of give people redress at the right point would be something like traceability of data. And that's kind of currently not built into the system. And that's where I'd like to be able to kind of, encourage the Smart Data Council, encourage government to think cross-sector. We need a cross-sector redress regime. How are we going to facilitate that? How are we going to know that data moved out of finance and into marketing, into lending, and into kind of like energy or whatever, and we're going to be able to trace that, so we know the party at which point maybe that data was leaked or breached, such that somebody can get redress and actually feel, okay, my data was leaked at that point, I might suffer a loss in future. I won't know because there's all this data floating around in the ether, but we know that company breached the data and they know they breached the data. And at the moment, that's sort of like that traceability of data doesn't exist. So I think in the technology, there's still a bit of work that we can do to improve that kind of sense of security and also responsibility, and will make redress easier, because I don't think we've really started the conversations on what does redress look like in a data sharing ecosystem. When something does go wrong, how do we work out whether it was the pylon or the cable or the light switch and who's responsible?
Yeah, that liability is really important. And I think, taking that another step, wouldn't it be fantastic if the rules of engagement encapsulated the data itself? So the data arrived telling you what you can do with the data and whether you can even touch it at all. That would negate the fact for traceability, but I mean that's a little bit further off and in other worlds.
Going back to some of the value conversations, and all this infrastructure is absolutely critical, and building this out of the ground is going to be the key thing over the next period for smart data. I think if we go back to the value, though, I think starting with when you build this, and this, I think, again, we've learned over time, and we've learned over and over again, very painfully, that if you don't start with the value, you end up designing the infrastructure so it doesn't work, okay, for where it's going to deliver the value. So we've got to start with the value. And one of my major concerns is something that Faith talked about, which is we don't start with some of the bigger challenges that sit embedded in our society, because we don't see it. We don't see people who are spending their whole weekends or large parts of their lives caring for their parents or the disabled child. We don't see the cost of individuals having to integrate health services from the hospital to the GP to the physiotherapist, etc. We don't see what I call that warm body integration unit that is everybody's lives. And at the moment, it's not seen, it's not measured. And if we don't measure it, we won't fix it. So I would say one of the things we need to absolutely focus on, to Faith's point earlier on, is those services that solve those things for people. And we have to therefore look at those things and measure them and then work out how we can actually fix them. And that, by the way, is productivity. That is national productivity. And it reminds me, going back to the electricity example, was taking my children to the Science Museum, and then we're like down in the basement looking at something, and it was, look at this is the original Hoover, like the carpet cleaner.
Vacuum cleaner.
And there's the vacuum cleaner. And there was this picture, was an advert for a vacuum cleaner. It was a gentleman dressed in tweed with a pipe, and it said, "Gentlemen, why not buy your wife a Hoover? It will make her happy." And I'm like, no, it will make her really productive, and it will mean she can go out to work. and she can get her own independence, she can earn money and lift the economy. That's what we're talking about. Let's do that. Let's give ourselves hoovers.
Wonderful, wonderful. I'm conscious of time. It's now 12:15, so we're slightly running over, but I'm going to just ask each of you for a final comment. Before I do, I think one of the things certainly that seems to be coming out of this conversation as well is that the way in which or the lens within which we're viewing this whole conversation needs to be more ambitious, coming back to Faith's point. And at the same time, the government, I think, in terms of the way it's structuring itself internally, is very much around this kind of cross-government collaboration. So, of course, I'm picking up on Liz's point there in terms of, addressing, I suppose, societal challenges. It's like these mission statements. It's almost as if, there is a mission statement that we want to tackle financial resilience and, poverty. There's a mission statement that we want to, I suppose, modernise public services for the better good. And I think as time progresses, it will become clearer as to what some of those kind of targets, I suppose, from through a societal lens will look like. You might disagree with me. Please feel free to do so if that's what you think. But I'd love to hear a last final comment from each of you, and I'm going to go in reverse order. So, Jacob, why don't you start, Faith, and then Liz?
So, I absolutely agree that there is a danger of designing services and solutions for the people that are building those services and solutions, the same way that every app now looks like it's designed for a child. We do need to ensure that inclusivity is an aspect of this. And I think some of the early positive signs is that, within open banking, some of the more interesting use cases have been around identifying people's eligibility for benefits, not necessarily within this country, but there are automation services that that smart data solutions can essentially deliver. And rather than just thinking about the data, it's actually switching the conversation to be, how can this make life easier for me? How can this remove the friction? And it can be from a business, it can be from an individual. Some of the research I did at Forrester, there was like a 40% uplift by moving to APIs. Well, that's an incentive for businesses to actually move some of their services to APIs, and that was helping drive adoption. So there are multiple challenges to tackle on this, some of which can be done through the underlying infrastructure and the framework, some of which can be done through broadening the remit of individuals, not the remit of individuals, broadening the consultation so that we are ensuring that we are building solutions that aren't digitally exclusive for people and different subsectors within society, because ultimately this should be something that drives benefit for all.
Thank you. Great. So, Faith.
So just a few words. I suppose for me, it is that point of ambition and vision. Let's lift our gaze. I feel that we've kind of got used to the trains that don't work in the UK, and we just kind of whinge about them. We need to make our systems work. They work elsewhere, they can work here. So I suppose it's just lift our gaze. Let's be inspired by our international neighbours. And I think we need to create that vision. So what does a digital UK look like? Data's part of that, but what's the overall vision, and how do we get into that conversation about sort of meeting those mission statements? How are we going to deliver a digital UK which delivers against kind of addressing poverty, addressing productivity, addressing aging, addressing climate change? How is data all going to flow into that, and what does it look like? I think the other thing which I'd say is lean in. So what we don't see in the UK is a culture of leaning into this. We see a culture of sort of like some kind of like caution and stepping back and wondering if I can maintain my profit without having to do this investment. And actually where we see in Brazil people taking it, it's because the banks leaned in, the data holders leaned in, and we don't see enough of that leaning in. And then I think the other thing is we need to communicate. We haven't talked about it, But if we're going to really kind of create this digital UK where people can feel that they can rely on services, that they'll be contacted by their, by their local authority to say, yeah, it's time to do X, Y, and Z. You just click here and we'll get it done for you. If we're going to change that narrative, then we need people to know it's coming. And I think trust actually will most deliver through a massive improvement in public services. People actually have money put into their accounts because somebody else has done the hard work of working out that they are actually eligible for benefits, rather than being given and I joke you not, 30-page document to fill in for yet another different type of benefit, despite the fact that you filled in another one of those last week for another benefit. When we get past that, when we actually get that, I think when we get the trust in digital public infrastructure and digital services, we'll see that it's much easier to get it within wider commercial services, because people can see real value affecting their lives day to day. And they don't just see it for themselves, they see it for their neighbours, they see it for their older parents, they see it for their younger children, and they see it across the board. And so I think for me, there's something about, let's kind of get the vision, let's get some of the digital public infrastructure in place, and let's communicate that this is trustworthy and there's real value in it through the delivery and through actual kind of like communications.
Thank you, Faith. There's so much to think about, isn't there? And there's going to be so much to do. But yes, exciting times. Liz, why don't you close everything off?
It's just been an absolute pleasure to be in this room. Really, and I think it's a reflection of things that we've done that isn't rocket science and is something we can design and deliver. But I think to Faith's point, start with leaning in, and people lean in when they know there's something that's going to be good for them. Yeah. And I think therefore I would absolutely say go for value, don't go for compliance. Okay, compliance takes people to a position of no, and they will do things under duress. Value is where people strive to get there. So let's go for value, let's set that big ambition, and let's drive and strive towards that. And that enables us to bring investment. And that's one of the massive problems we have in this market, is wholly underinvested, not just here, but abroad as well. But look, in the UK, it's massively underinvested. In Europe, common data spaces have been invested by 20 billion euros. 20 billion euros. That's not even verification service, yeah? 20 billion. 10 billion public sector funding, 10 billion match funding from private sector. Where we have very limited investment, what happens is everybody scraps over what's actually there as far as money is concerned, which means we can't collaborate. This is a market for collaboration. When we're fighting over the crusts of investment, nobody's going to collaborate because they're all just grasping for what's there. We have to have more investment in this market. And on that, that vision mission will enable us to gain access to that investment alongside a solid strategy and plan to take that forward, which has to be focused on the principles, some of the principles we've talked about today about trust and the individual. And to that, we can bond value, capabilities and infrastructure, changes in consumer behavior, sustainable commercial models, and those new commercial models we were just talking about, and designing in trust. And those are the kind of big key component parts for enabling our market to flourish. And I'm very excited about the next period of time.
Absolutely. No, I think excitement is definitely the word of the day, along with ambition. Yes, then just to kind of wrap up, because I think what we were talking about is on the road to smart data, and what we think the direction of travel will be in the light of having a new Labour government. And clearly there is going to be this shift in focus. There is going to be this necessitating private-public collaboration. And over time, certainly it's going to be less market, I suppose, driven is what I'm coming around to saying. But there's an awful lot to do. I think the way in which as well the civil service approach this needs to adapt. And of course, that's a cultural shift that needs to change as well. And then this whole idea of investment in terms of, because fundamentally we're talking about public services and digital transformation, and the role that the private sector then plays in that, and how we as an economy and as a society more generally, what benefits are going to flow out of that. So thank you very much to our excellent speakers. Thank you to Liz, to Faith, and to Jacob. It's been absolutely fascinating, and again, a real pleasure. I'm always delighted to get such excellent speakers. I'm very fortunate to sit down with me, and so thank you very much. I'm sure there'll be an awful lot we want to discuss going forward. So yes, little round of applause to you all, and
thanks very much, Sam.
see you again soon. Take care.
Okay.